Hi, I'm Kathie from Fort Lonesome. We're a chain stitch and custom Western wear operation out of Austin, Texas. I'd like to invite you to join me for an exclusive lesson in learning how to hand chain stitch embroider. Before we get too involved in any of the development of imagery or thinking too hard about what we're going to stitch on our garment, I'm going to talk you through the basics of how to do a hand embroidered chain stitch using just a piece of scrap fabric or anything that you find around the house that you can use. So to get started, I've just got a little piece of scrap here, and I've got my hoop and my thread. And I'm just gonna draw a curved line on here to follow. And to set your fabric up in your hoop, all you do is you take the smaller of the two circles and lay it down on the table, lay your fabric over the hoop, and I kind of center whatever I'm gonna be stitching, and then take the second piece that has the screw attachment on it and place it over the smaller ring so that you've got kind of a tight fit, but then you'll actually screw the top hoop in tighter so that you can then go in and pull the fabric out around the edges of the hoop. You don't need to worry too much about creating too tight of a fit in the hoop, but it is nice to basically just give yourself a relatively stable surface to stitch on so that you're not creating a wiggly wobbly stitch. So once you've got your fabric in the hoop, then you're gonna unwind yourself a little bit of embroidery thread. I'm going to put my glasses on in order to be able to do this. And I'm going to start off by stitching with a full unsplit piece of embroidery thread just to give you a thicker stitch to follow. When we get into our garment stitching, I'll show you how to split the thread in half so that you wind up with a slightly more delicate line. But I start off by just cutting off a little piece of thread. This is just practice, so it doesn't really matter how long it is, but you don't ever want to cut off a piece of thread much longer than measuring from your nose to the tip of your finger. If your thread is much longer than that, it's just too easy to get it tangled up as you're stitching. And I'm going to select a needle that has a relatively large eye, especially because I'm not splitting my thread, and so it's kind of a thick thread to try to get into the eye of the needle. I always wet the end of the thread. That just helps it stick together a little bit better. And then I pinch the end of the thread to flatten it out a little bit, which just makes it easier to insert into the eye of the needle. I just kind of squeeze the end of the thread and literally just sort of insert it from between my fingers into the eye of the needle without giving the end of the thread too much wiggle room with which to come unwound and become a little bit unwieldy. Then you're going to want to create a knot on the other end of your thread. The way that I was taught was just to hold the thread between your thumb and pointer finger, wrap the thread around your pointer finger, and then just use your thumb to roll the thread up and off the tip of your pointer finger. And then if you take that mass that you basically just collected and pull down on it like that, then you'll wind up with a knot at the end of your thread. Once you've got a knot, you're going to come up from underneath your fabric at the end of your line, pull the thread all the way through. You're going to kind of create a little bit of a lasso around the area that you're stitching towards. You're going to sink your needle down right next to where the thread is coming up and out of your fabric. So this is going to be a down and up motion. You'll sink your needle down, and then you're going to come up from the bottom of the fabric to the top You're just going to want to create a stitch that's approximately anywhere between 1/3 to 1/4 of an inch down the line that you're stitching. And then you'll just pull the needle through, pull the thread all the way through, and you'll see that you've created a chain that is being held in place by your thread that is then where you will start your next stitch. So again, you're going to sink your needle down right next to where your thread is coming up. You'll have it emerge about 1/4 of an inch down your line, and you're going to want to catch this loop that you've just created. Again, sink the needle where the thread is coming up. Move your needle about 1/4 of an inch down your line. Make sure that you've got this loop set up for yourself, and then pull the needle through so that it's coming up through that loop and catching it on your next stitch. And then you're just going to keep doing that to create the line that you've drawn on your fabric. And again, as we get into the imagery creation process, you'll see that there's several different things that you can play around with here to create a thinner line, a more nuanced line. You can play around with the thickness of the thread, with the distance between stitches. Okay, so once you've gotten to the end of the line that you're stitching, you'll want to lock down your last chain. So the last loop that you created, the thread came up through the center of the loop, and then you're going to want to have your needle sink on the other side of the thread so that when you pull your thread through to the bottom, you're locking down that last final stitch. And after you've got that locked down, you can flip your work over to the back. And what I usually do, because I don't like to create too many knots on the underside of my project, I'll usually just take my needle and work it back through a few of the stitches that I've created, going one way, and then I'll come back going the other way. And then I use my little snippers to cut the thread off there. Now that you've got the basics of how to do a hand embroidered chain stitch, it would be a great time for you to doodle around a little bit on your piece of scrap fabric, maybe create a spiral or a larger circle, and just buckle down and practice for a little bit so that you feel like you've got the gesture comfortably down. Thanks for joining us for this lesson on hand chain stitch embroidery. If you want to learn more about creating your own piece of vintage inspired custom Western wear, come on over and check out the full class on Skillshare by clicking the link below.